For those of you who don't know me, I've been dating all the time.
Yeah, you have a mic.
Okay, now it works, right? Is it working? Yeah. So thank you all for being here on this beautiful summer evening. And I'll hand it over to Steve in 1 second, but I wanted to say hello to the people who are joining us via Zoom. And it might be hard for the folks on Zoom to actually see the screen. So I've put links for 2 slide decks in the chat on Zoom. The first link is for Steve's presentation, and the second link is for Molly's presentation. So without any further ado, I pass it over to you, Steve.
Yeah, it's great.
Was it?
All right, good. Well, start off also by saying thanks to everybody. It's a little bit intimidating. I thought it was just going to be the family here tonight, but hopefully you find it worth your while. Am I getting out okay? Yeah. Okay. I'll start off with if somebody was thinking that was a typo up there, 1885, it really isn't. There's been groups of island residents that have been concerned about access to Samish Island, various group formed all the way back to 1885. So we're just kind of the Samish Island Resilient Access Committee. I don't think they called themselves the Resilient Access Committee, but anyway, that group, and I'm kind of proud of it because my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather were both part of that group. So I'm going to be fumbling around here a bit, so bear with me. And that didn't work. Why was that, Graham? Try that. Okay, Samish Island Resilient Access Committee. These are the members, and they can all stand up, and you can see who these folks are: Martha Frankel, Eileen Anderson, Mike, Bill Dewey, Chuck Howell, Dan McShane, and Molly Dorn's our Skagit Land Trust liaison on the committee. I think we have a really good committee. We have people that are experienced in local and national government. We have scientists. We have communication specialists, emergency response / management people. Industries were represented. So I think we've got a really good committee. That's our mandate: promote the welfare of Samish Island community as it relates to the threat from tidal inundation. And this stems, we're a part of the Samish Island Community Center. One of the Samish Island Community Center bylaws, one of the things the community center is tasked to do is promote the welfare of the community. And that's what our committee tries to do. Our primary focus is at this time on road access and these early warning and emergency protocols, but there's lots of other things associated with the welfare of the community and these floods that we'll be talking about and trying to mitigate those effects. We've been studying the issue to become fully educated and speak knowledgeably when we talk to the county or talk to you folks. we've really worked hard to understand the history. And so we can make it sound like we know what we're talking about. One thing we do not do, we're very careful not to do, is we don't present ourselves as representing the community, that we speak for the community, that somehow we are authorized by the community to speak on the community's behalf. We do not do that, and we're really, really careful about that. That's not what Sammamish Community Center's role is. Although we might not spell that out absolutely explicitly, but we're aware of that. So get into the program here. Nature of the threat. And a lot of you will have seen some of this if you're aware of the communications that we have provided to the county. Some of this will be old information for you. Some of it, for some of you, it'll be new information. So I just got a couple of slides on here of an event on January 7th of 2022. We had water over the roadway. I think I was in Maui, so I can't really speak to it personally. But we had water over the roadway, and people were having to turn around and didn't want to drive through that water. We had significant flooding down here on Blue Heron, so we had a flood event. The flood event was on the 7th of January. See if I can highlight that. 7th of January. This is a NOAA screenshot from the NOAA website that shows the actual tides versus the predicted tides. The blue line is the predicted, the green line is the actual. And this is January 7th. The predicted tide right here, 9'6". The book tide was 9'6". That tide came in at 11'4". 11'4", and we had flooding. One thing interesting that I want to point out right over here, that tide, January 4th, that's the highest book tide in the 18-year period starting in 2016. The highest tide on the book, 10-foot tide. There's actually two of them, one last year and one in 2024, 9 foot. These are Chuckanut Bay tides. So 10-foot tide, but it came in just barely over 10 feet. And we didn't have flooding problem, but that 9'6", because of meteorological conditions or whatever, came in at 11'4". We had flooding. This one people probably remember better. December 27th, Sammamish Island Road. These are some scenes on Sammamish Island Road. Spilling over there, I think is that the spot where the sandbags are?
Sandbags, yes.
Or other, no, that's the sandbag spot, right? And that's where the eco blocks currently are. What else we have here? Water flowing over the road. There it is, December 27th, 9'7" on the book. And it came in at 11 foot. That says 9'5". Oh, here, these are actually Port Townsend. You can only get these actual numbers for Port Townsend, but we're essentially, that's our harmonic station. All our tides are derived, predictions and everything are derived from Port Townsend tides. 11'9". That may be the highest tide ever. If it isn't, it was real close to it. So 9'6" tide, 9'7" tides can pose a real threat for us under the right conditions. So I took 9'5" as the tide level we were going to be concerned about. This is a graph that shows the frequency of 9'5" or higher tides by year, the period from 2016 to 2031. So we're right in here, right? Last year had 21, and this year's just under 20 or 20. The scale's a little goofed up on this chart that I got. So we're in a period right now where we are looking at a lot higher frequency of these 9'5" tides. 2016 to 21, there were 78 of them. In this 5-year period, 2022 to 27, we're gonna have 135 of those tides. Another way to look at it. This is 2031, the lowest year on there. There's only 9 tides, 9'5" or greater, 2 of which are 9'7", 9'6", and a couple of 9'5". That's what we're looking at for 2031. This winter, this next winter, that's what we're faced with. Got a 9'9", couple of 9'8". I think there's 7, 8, 9'7". 2021, there's 2, bunch of 9'6", and total of 25 this next winter. That's in February, November, December, January, February. We're gonna have 25 9-footer, 5 or higher tides. So we're very concerned, obviously, because of the frequency of these high tide events. The probability just based on the frequency obviously goes up. The other consideration, the other concern we have is the condition of the dike. I've just got a couple of shots here. If you, this is the Dike District 5 dike, kind of the north end of the Dike District 5. And you can see all the armoring on the outside of the dike. This is the section of dike that was repaired after December 27th event. The land trust came in and repaired this. It's got no armoring on there. And these, these problems can arise because we have overtopping of the dike. If it's simply overtopping, it might be something that just lasts for a few hours. The tide goes back out again. And if it doesn't come back high again the next day and it doesn't damage the dike, it's inconvenient, but it's not life-threatening maybe. The other thing that can happen is you can have a big storm that doesn't overtop, but if the dike condition of the dike itself is not what it should be, like it's not properly armored, and you get a relatively high tide with some wind behind it, you can damage a dike and wash it away. And maybe Norm will speak better to this than I can. We've got Norm Hoffman here from Dike District 5. The implication of not having this armoring on this dike. We've got a section of dike up close to the island right here that I took a picture of. These are pictures from the outside. So dike, and I'm not sure what the elevation is here of this relatively skookum looking section, but at the top, there's about 1.5 feet of much lighter fill on top of this dike. And it's been washed away. Tide events high enough to get up to, and I suspect this is 11 or 11.5 or something like that. And then a foot and a half of this light fill that's been partially eaten away. So that kind of looks like to the untrained eye, like a problem area on this dike. This one just shows the relative height where the land trust finished their work, or Arnie finished his work, and then the level the dike drops down to. So the height of the dike overall is a concern. It's got all these trees on it. I don't know if that's good or bad. This spot right here, this is right near the sandbag spot. If you can see that, you can see how this this is part of the existing coastal marsh that's outside the dike, which is a good thing in a lot of areas because it actually provides some additional protection for the dike. But in this area, that is really eaten away. So it's right up to the foot of the dike. Here's the material at the foot of the dike, but then you have this material here, and this material is insubstantial. You can just kick that away. Other areas, interestingly, and this may be a section of it right up here, where the existing saltwater marsh is remarkably the same configuration as it was in 1885. It's so similar, it hasn't changed. That coastal marsh shoreline has not changed, except, this is the exception, right in here. You can actually see this line here that kind of goes out to that little hillock out there. That's a portion of of the saltwater marsh, the original saltwater marsh. Right in there, I think, is the line where this section of saltwater marsh used to extend out there. Over some period of time, we don't know what that period is, that saltwater marsh has degraded right in that section. And if you were to look at this map right here, you can see how far that extends out. This is 1956. It extends out beyond the dike, right in this area, but now it's right at the foot of the dike. Why exactly that is, that's anybody's guess. But these things that we're seeing are why we're concerned about the condition of the dike. So we have the high tides, and we have a dike that hasn't been maintained. I don't think there's been any maintenance done on this dike except for the most recent work since 1970. Norm can talk about how much maintenance they do on their dikes every year to keep them up to snuff. I know that they touch them more often than every 50 years, I'm pretty sure. Actually, I'm not, you'll have to confirm. Okay, so that. And the third thing is, it's kind of a triple whammy. The climatologists are not in total agreement on this, but there's kind of a consensus coalescing around the notion that these extratropical cyclones that bring these super low pressures to us may not, with climate change, may not increase in frequency, but they're going to potentially increase in intensities. Those flows that they bring to us to cause those tides, actual tides, a big factor in causing those actual tides to come in so much higher than the projected tides, are these low pressure. And we could be experiencing more of those extreme low pressure events, or when they happen, they'll be more extreme. The pressures will be lower. That's possible. So that's kind of the triple win. So add those together, we're a little bit concerned about maintaining our access to the island. Brief history. We talked, this is not of much value to you, but this is the petition that the 1885 version of the Samish Island Resilient Access Committee submitted to the county. In 1885, Samish Island, there was no road access to Samish Island. You had to get here by boat. And the Resilient Access Committee circa 1885 gave this submitted a petition to the county to ask the county to build a road out here. And in this document that they submitted, they proposed a route for the road. There apparently was a, did I switch it? I didn't mean to. That's all right. Hit the wrong button. There was a road. Here's Roney Road. George Eckenberg, Grandpa Eckenberg lived right, this was his place right here. And at the foot of Roney Road, there was a road that went down the bank. So that was, if you got here by boat, then you could get onto the road system right in here somewhere. And it's possible that I think that there's remnants of that road still there in that area. They asked to build a road along the high bank right to here to Colonel Hallmer's property, which is now the church property. The line was about right there, and then head off across the flats to link up with the road that was being proposed by the folks over in Edison. So their idea was they laid out the route. It would have to cross the slough. I guess I hadn't really mentioned that. There was a slough separating Samish Island from the mainland. So that's why we're an island. So this is what one of the things they talked about is they had to get across the slough. So they gave these measurements, 296 feet to get across the slough, 132 feet through really deep water, and then 164 where it wasn't quite so deep, but still covered by the tides. They thought that a bridge was the best option for getting across there. That was their opinion. Then the dike was going to follow the shoreline, the eastern shoreline of Alice Bay, and link up with this, then hit the what they called the William Dale Dike, hit the William Dale Dike, following along inside the William Dale Dike until it linked up with this proposed road that the folks in Edison were pushing for. Okay, here's a map, 1887. We couldn't find, I couldn't find a map that did show prior to 1887. This was the earliest map I was able to come up with. It actually, it shows the slough, but it also shows the bridge right in there. So this was great. 1885, Samish Island Resilient Access Committee puts a petition into the county to build a road. 1887, check that out. There's the bridge, doesn't actually show the road, but the road just snaked along there. And you can't read that, but that says William Dale. This is the William Dale Dike. And it's went along inside the William Dale Dike till it met up with this proposed road that the folks in Edison. That William Dale Dike, I believe, was in 1895, at that time, the northern boundary of Dike District 5. This land was federal land. In 1887, this was federal land. Since section 36 of township, whatever it is, and it was federal land, had not been granted to anybody else. This was Evelyn Cliffs, my cousin Evelyn, who wrote a history. This is how she described that road. You know, slab logs running from squares. She said Hank Flug, obviously in 1887, it wasn't Hank Flug, but it was William Dale. But that's the description of the road right there. One thing to note, it's areas above mean high water, 7.8 feet. If it's shown as land on this map, the elevation of that is higher than mean high water. Mean high water. Mean high water is the delineation between water and land on these charts. So this land, just because it's depicted here as land, we know was higher than 7.8 feet. Was there anything else I want to say about that? Said that. Oh, we're way down there already. Hey, we're making good time. Okay. I have a bunch of notes here that I'm not utilizing, so I could end up missing something that I really wanted to point out. William Dale Dike. Okay. This is, well, back up a little bit. 1898, James Squires got the lease on this land. It was federal land, I mentioned. 1889, this became state land. The federal government, when at statehood, the federal government gave land to the state of Washington, in our case, for school trust land, 2 sections out of every township. One of the sections was 36. I mentioned that this land's in section 36. So this was state land granted by the federal government in 1889 to generate revenue for schools. And the other section, I think, is 16, but I'm not positive about that. Is that right? So 2 sections in every township, 36 and 16. This land was in 36. So 1898, James Squires leased this land. He leased this land. So we've got a road across there, across the flats, undiked. But in 1898, James Squires leased this land and he started diking to create farmland. He started diking to create farmland. And this is a 1908 map, if I'm not mistaken. Provided this map, I'm pretty sure. And it shows, it's really hard to see, but it shows the dikes. Shows a dike. I gotta quit doing that. Shows the dike running along here. Here's that William Dale dike down here to get you all oriented. Dike runs right along the shore there, runs all the way up to a point right there, and then cuts across, kind of following the slough, and meets up with another dike that goes like that. So this area in 1908 was diked in. As we move through the discussion, it'd be good to keep in mind that spot right there where the road crossed this east-west dike. So this was, I think, actually, I attribute it to Lauren Hanson, but I think it's a quote from Gladys Squires, a history that she wrote, and describing the section beyond that point I was just noting to the island. There was a bridge, and there's things in the Sandwich Island history book. There's at least one account in there that describes that bridge a little bit, said that that bridge was underwater part of the time. So this last stretch, you're outside the dike, and you really had to pay attention to the tides when you went across this last stretch. This doesn't really show the lagoon that you saw in that 1887, that this was quite a low area in here, lagoon. I think that's it. Okay. 1929, the next generation of the Sandwich Island Resilient Access Committee. And again, you can't read it, but there are some pretty fun things here, depending on your sense of humor. Jack Hopley, Farrah Hopley, H.L. Hopley, M.W. Hopley, George Loop, you all know. There's W.L. Hopley, that's my granddad. Gladys Hopley, that's my grandmother. Martha, great grandmother, and Uncle Colley, great uncle. Those guys were active on this Resilient Access Committee. Anyway, what's the point? They submitted this petition to Skagit County to get that road across the flats improved and build a new road, a straighter, drier road that better visibility, safer, more usable. So 1931, this is really hard to see, but this is a document from the submission that the Skagit County made to the state of Washington Commissioner of Public Lands to secure right-of-way across the state land to build the new road. And this is, as you'll see, this is pretty much the route of the road. You see, notice there where it says 50 foot wide south of east-west dike and 40 feet north of the east-west dike. I said, keep in mind that spot on the map, that 1908 map where that east-west dike went across. It was right in here. You can see where, if you could read this, you would see that the right-of-way goes right in this area from 50 feet down to 40 feet. That's right in there. That's right where that east-west dike was. So the road went the right-of-way that they were asking for, which got approved, 50 feet wide up to that point, 40 feet wide from that point on. We're going to see it again in a second, but it was 50 feet because the road, as anticipated, was going to have a 10-foot ditch on the west side. The center line would be, in both cases, the 40 and the 50, the center line was 20 feet from the eastern boundary. But when you get down below this point where it crossed the dike, it went to 50 feet, and they anticipated a ditch on the west side of that road. And based on some other documents and the way it currently works, that ditch would have, make sure I don't have the wrong button, would have flowed to the south down this way.
Was the bridge still in place in 31?
The bridge was still in place in 31. This is the proposal, the submittal to the county, to the state commissioner of public lands to get the right of way to construct the new road. We'll see the significance of that change to 40 feet here, more significance of it here in a minute. Okay, so here it is. There's the new road. And I wanted this on here. I mean, this is a fairly recent aerial photo. This is actually the photo that the county handed out on December 22nd, or wrong, February 27th, when they came out here for a meeting. But I found it interesting that, and I've gone out there trying to see what this is. See that really faint green line right across there? You know what that is, Molly?
That's the old Dike line, huh?
You go back to that 1908 map, that is right where that old dike ran. Why, what it is now, change in vegetation or whatever, that dike shows up on there. I just thought that's pretty cool. Come on. What do we got, Graham? That's not good. Okay. I hit the wrong button.
You can press the keyboard.
Which is the advance button on this?
Down arrow.
That's what I thought. This thing's showing the. Okay, so it didn't switch. We're not communicating.
So change on the computer, but not the check.
Yeah, but it didn't change on the projector. It changed on this.
Oh.
Time out.
Oh.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay, not a problem. Okay, this is pretty fun. Gail took that 1887 map that we've already seen of the coastal marsh topographic map from 1887, made it the exact size of that photograph, printed it as a transparency and laid it on top of that map of the road. That road runs right through there in that lagoon. This is James Squires or Jimmy Squires' description of what happened right then. So we're an island until 1932. 1932. The county gets the right of way to build this new road, and it went right across there. And they closed that road closed that slough off. And as we'll see in a minute, that road was at an elevation. That road did not need a dike. That was that 40-foot right-of-way section of that we saw in the drawings that started about right there. Went across that lagoon, 40-foot right-of-way at the same elevation as the dikes. The road was the dike. And then Jimmy Squires, is this the Thrifty Farmer quote? Yeah, Thrifty Farmer closed in this end, sometime after that. So this section of road right here was open to Alice Bay when it was built and to Padilla Bay. Jimmy Squires diked this off subsequently to make some grazing land. But it's kind of a key significant feature that the road was the dike. I think that's probably the primary takeaway that I'm trying to make here. Okay, this one's hard to see too, but this is just more confirmation. This is back up a little bit. If you come up here and look at this 1956 photograph really closely, you can see that man-made structure of the dike running right to there. And on this photo, there's no evidence of a dike along Samish Island Road. It doesn't show up on this photograph that there was a dike on the Alice Bay side of Samish Island Road in 1956. 1961 survey. Here's an enlargement of this area right here. This is that area I said to make note of. This is where that east-west dike took off. Here's the dike. It's shown on here as a dike. Shown boom, 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 boom. Tapers right into the road. It all ties in. That section of road, and see if I can. I don't know, I can't really make it out, but actually, it's right there. And if I had my magnifying glass, that's where it tapered down from 50 to 40, right there, where the east-west dike came in and tied in with this dike. So all indications are that in 1961, there wasn't a dike on the Alice Bay side. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Yeah. I was just out there. I took those photographs. It was a couple of weeks ago. And I can say with 100% assurance, there is a dike there now. There's a dike that runs. There's some debate about how that came about. Gail's pushing for the dike ferry option. I'm kind of leaning towards Peter Rabbit or Easter Bunny. But anyway, sorry about that. But 1961, all indications are there's no dike there. And why was that? Well, when it was built, the road didn't need a dike. It was the same elevation as the dike. Elevation data in the case for land subsidence. What a lead in. Early on in the discussions that we had with Land Trust and with Norm, there was a discussion we had where Norm and Molly were talking about the Padilla Bay dike and how interesting it was, this remarkable difference in elevation between the land inside the dike on the Padilla Bay side and the land outside the dike. And they both kind of attributed that to accretion, a buildup of the land outside the dike. Wasn't too long after that, we had to get together here. I can't remember what it was, but Dan, who's not here tonight, but who's our resident geologist. Oh, he is here. Were you here when we talked about the condition of the dike? Anything you want to add to that?
Histosoils?
What's that?
Histosoils.
Histosoils. Is that the kind where you just kick it and it falls away?
You drain the farmland and it has a lot of organics in the soil. You drain it, those organics start to degrade and turn into gas. And the land surface subsides. So the act of farming, draining the delta, you've got a lot of organic soil here, it's all subsides. It's not extreme here, but in other areas of the Joaquin Delta, it's dropped about 6 feet.
Yeah. So we had, I met Dan that night. We're chatting away and talking about various things, and he mentions Stephen Squires. Stephen Squires relating to him how his grandpa complained to him that somebody was stealing his dirt. And Dan said he probably doesn't realize this land subsidence issue. When you build these dikes, the land subsides. So started doing a little research. Well, first off, real quickly, you go out, this is where the land trust did the work, and it doesn't really show here very well, but this is the view from outside the dike. Look, you're standing on this, the existing coastal marsh, looking back on the dike. It's not quite just a low berm, but even though it's been added and it's up to elevation about 13 feet, it doesn't look like much. Stand on the inside and look at that dike. That dike's about 7 feet tall. And here's a view from up, and you really can't see it, the difference in elevation between the outside the dike, remnants of the coastal marsh, and inside the dike.
Wow.
So started doing a little bit of research. This is just the title page. This is one of many articles you can find out there that discuss land subsidence when you drain these coastal marsh. You read it, it absolutely pertains to exactly what we have there. Coastal marsh, dike it, drain it, expose the organics to oxygen. You should anticipate that the land's going to subside up to ½ an inch a year for 150 years. It's been what? A little over 100 years. I mean, that would be 50 inches potentially in some scenarios, and this is coastal dike. So, okay, there's reason to think there might be some credence to this. Let's do some elevation work. And I was going to bring the laser and get Chuck to handle the stick. So we did some elevation work. The committee did. This is an elevation profile. This is where the eco blocks are. Measured this on 23rd of February. The book tide was 9.3. And this is key to making this all work. Those charts that show the actual to projected, the actual tide that day was 9 feet. Okay, great. So we use 9 feet actual tide. The dike is, so we were there right at high tide. On a calm morning, it was dark enough to see the laser, which meant we were there at 6:30 in the morning. Set the laser up on the dike and took these measurements. There's the level of the water, right there, that blue line. That's the level of a 9-foot tide. The dike, 2 feet higher. The dike right in that section, this is where, right where, it doesn't show the eco box, but in the 27th, when it overflowed, it was right here, 11-foot dike. What did I say? 11.95 tide that day. Then the road, 8'3". The ditch and the field on the other side of the road, 6'5". So, I mentioned earlier in that chart, the elevation of that, anything depicted on that map was at minimum 7.8 feet. That road now is, that field is 6.5 feet. More on that later. This road is, the crown of the road, 8'3" is below, it's above mean high water, but it's below mean higher high water. And during the winter, there's never a day when the tide isn't higher than, at some point higher than 8.3 feet. We did it again over in the area that and we did this 3 or 4 times. Where the repair was done, this is good because it had the salt marsh outside. And I think I said that in that article said, if you want to know measure the degree of subsidence, find a reference marsh that you can use to measure from. Well, we have reference marsh right outside the dike in that location, especially the reference marsh. This was an 8'2" tide actual, came in just above and worked out to 9'2". That's the level of the reference marsh. The dike, 13 feet there. So they raised it up, we're in good shape. Road came in right at 8.3 when we did the calculations. Agreed to the third decimal with the other calculation. You can take it to the bank. The crown of that road's 100 inches above mean lower low water. And then the field out over on that side of the road, 6.5, and the field over here, 6.5 feet, 3 feet lower. That observation, yeah. What the naked eye said, yeah, it was right. That feels way, way lower than the marsh. And the road, which used to run across land at this elevation, is now lower. Crown of the road is about a foot lower than the elevation of that reference marsh on the outside. I got to go through these quickly here. I'll leave some time. These are just some elevation profiles of the road from the county website. It didn't want to see that one quite yet. Shows the end of the dike. This is right the same place we've been talking about. This is 1932. Dike ends right there. This is state land. This says this is tidal lands out here, and it runs along. Okay. We go down here, and these numbers are a little bit hard to interpret, but I think the way they work is it starts from the end of the projects and goes down. This road going across the lagoon is at 68, whatever that is. 68. I think that's 32 feet lower than this point. And then the road crosses the dike, an east-west dike, or the high bank that the committee members referred to, and then it drops down 3 feet to 65. So the road in here is 3 feet below this, but this section of road is the same height as that dike. And this is really interesting. There was another proposal for a road route, and it cut the dike right there and went across Alice Bay, outside the dike, across Alice Bay. This was not adopted. But if you look at this right here, and you look right down there, it shows the dike. This is where it cuts the dike. And that dike elevation right there is 68. So this dike, that dike, and the road are all at this 68 elevation. And it's just a guess that even back then, this is in Dike District 5 right here, this dike, that they tried to have their dikes about 4 feet higher than the ground, which is 9'2", we said. And so this dike was probably maybe about 13 feet. And this section of road was 13 feet. And this section was 3 feet lower. So maybe 10 feet, that the road was 10 feet. It's 8.3 feet now, 100 inches above mean lower water. You know, what's the significance of that? I think the significance is the road as it currently exists today, 8.3 feet above mean low water, is much more vulnerable to these tide events. 10-foot roads also vulnerable, 8'3" road, totally vulnerable. You know, that's not a road. That's not a road safe for ordinary travel without a dike. And that's just part of the argument that the dikes are absolutely part of the critical road infrastructure. Without dikes, we don't have a road that's safe for ordinary travel. Okay. Summary of communications. We saw the picture from January 7th. We had flooding over the road. There was a ton of correspondence on Sammy's neighbors about the situation, and people are wondering, what's the deal on the dikes? What's the deal on the dikes? Who's responsible for getting these dikes in shape and preventing the road from flooding? One of the people that responded was Norm, and this is just an excerpt from what he wrote. He did say a lot in there about how the private landowner has primary responsibility for maintaining the dikes, but then he added that the county would do whatever it took to protect the dikes, protect their road, whatever. And this email and subsequent conversations, when we had the dike tours or whatever, talking this issue over, was kind of the basis for the assumption communicated to the county when we had that problem this problem when the dike failed. This is the dike after the December 27th flood. This dike had failed. Essentially, it was leaking through. Norm was reporting to us about the condition of the dike and how it was continuing to come over on these subsequent high tides and washing away more and subject to catastrophic failure. So I was in communication with primarily Lisa Janicki, trying to impress upon her how important it was to get in there and fix this dike. It was an urgent situation. We had to get in there and fix this dike. And as history and you all well know, we didn't get anywhere on that effort at that time to get the county to come in there and fix that dike. But in this conversation with Commissioner Janicki, I made this statement, we anticipate that the county's going to repair these dikes. And it was kind of based on that email from the subsequent conversations that we had. But we really didn't know all the nuts and bolts of it. Why Dike District 5 felt that the county would come in and repair the dike. We didn't know the whole history. But I relayed that to Janicki. She said, we've looked into it. We got no record. Or we've either lost the, she called it village memory. We don't have any record of ever having worked on that dike. Okay. So I said, I'm gonna come up with some concrete information for you here. So I asked Norm, and he forwarded me this email from Jim Sullivan, because he asked Jim. Jim had direct knowledge about that because he did a lot of the work. Is that right?
Right.
That's right. He did a lot of this work. So this part about working on the Padilla Bay side, there's no question about. They had worked on it. And anecdotally, from talking to people, whatever, it was his understanding that the county had done significant work on the Alice Bay side also. This was sent to Commissioner Janicki on the 6th of January, 2023. And I did ask in here, I said, hey, if you're aware of any time when the Squires owned the property, when the dike was damaged and the road was threatened, and the county told the Squires, you got to come in there and fix that dike. That's your responsibility. Get in there and fix that dike. I didn't get a response to that. I asked the same question of Commissioner Browning when I forwarded him. I tried to forward it to Commissioner Wiesen also, but I had the wrong email address. This is kind of dirty pool. This is a screenshot shortly thereafter that somebody sent to Molly Dorn, the Skagit County Public Works landing page. That picture right there. If you went back to the description that Jim Sullivan gave of the work that they did on the Padilla Bay dike, it corresponds exactly to that. Put these piling in, added these sandbags, used the gators from Dike District 12.
Right.
Dike District 12, that was 1 year. Came back the following year, took all this out, replaced it with rock. That photo's not, we have pointed that out. It's not on their website anymore. Okay. So we had the meeting, some of this communication. I met with how much time are you gonna need? Half an hour? I'm going as fast as I can. I met with Commissioner Wiesen for quite a while. I had spoken a lot with Commissioner Janicki and tried to pin them down on exactly what it was that the Samish Island community could expect from the county in terms of maintaining this dike or repairing the dike if we had another event like December 27th. And it was really, really hard to pin them down. And I said, listen, we need a definitive statement from the county telling the community so we can plan, so we can know exactly what's your policy on these dikes. It wasn't forthcoming and especially, I mean, Commissioner Gleason said, we're not gonna do any preventative work. We can't do it, all this stuff. And we might come in after the facts and if the road was cut off and we might take some action, but it was very unclear. So I said, I communicated this. If you guys aren't gonna write this up, I'm gonna write it up. Based on my conversation, I'm gonna write it up. I'm gonna run it by you and we're gonna provide it to the community. Commissioner Janicki got very upset about that. Basically warned me off. Don't be writing up anything purported to be a policy statement of the county, you know, don't do that. And 2 days later, they announced that they were going to come out here for the community meeting on the 27th of February. We're thinking, great, they're going to come out here and they're going to spell it out for us in a community meeting. We're not going to have to write this up. They're going to come out and spell it out. Were most of you at the meeting that night, a lot of you? You know, I went through that meeting and I kept waiting for that definitive statement, what we can expect from the county in terms of repairing the dike ahead of time, preventative maintenance, or coming in after the fact. And I didn't hear it. I heard how they cannot work on private dikes. They had this term for private dikes that they all repeated verbatim. Private dikes on private property or some complicated structure that they all use. But I didn't hear that definitive statement. And after the meeting, I spoke with Grace Kane and I said, listen, I didn't hear the answer to that definitive statement. I said, here's a question. If that situation happened on December 27th, happened again tomorrow, would the county come in and repair that dike? She says, no, we wouldn't. We would not come in. And we can't work on private dikes, and then kind of intimated that their attorneys were telling them they couldn't work on private dikes. So after that meeting, the next morning, I got a call from Tom Sheehan, who's the former
Emergency manager for Skagit County.
And he had been at the meeting. He says, I just need to let you know what we heard last night, that the county cannot work on private dikes is a bunch of, I think he said malarkey. He says that's not true. And then he described the same repair that had been done, that we had the pictures of, that Jim had described exactly the same, more detail, how they had used prison labor, had a knife fight, all this stuff. And he described the mechanism. That you need an emergency resolution of the county commission. They pass an emergency resolution recognizing the threat. And if they do that, they can expend money and work on this. Doesn't make any difference on private property or not. So that caused this document search. So we came up with, well, this one and subsequently this one, 2 emergency resolutions that the county passed. And you read the wording in there if you could read it. They deem necessary to make these repairs to the saltwater dike to protect the county road and the property. So right, you know, they acknowledged that those dikes were critical to protecting the road. They passed these emergency resolutions, and this was the mechanism that they used. So we can't work on private dikes. And Tom said, yeah, they can do it, and this is how they do it. So this started this document search, actually, because there's some great sources on the county website where you can find. These all came out of off the county website. And those petitions and all that all came off the county website. Including these 2. And I say what appear to be easements granting county access because there's something that we wrote in a letter that the county didn't agree with, and we provided these to the county. So I'm saying they appear to be easements granting the county the right to construct dikes along the Allen Space site. This is in government lot 3, one of them is, and the other one's in government lot 6, which is the whole area in question. government lot 3 is up closer to the island, 6 runs all the way down to Dike District 5. So they've got the easement, according, it appears that they have the easement. Here's a couple of letters. One of these says, we've been working on the, what appear to be letters, they're in letter format. They're on the county website. There's no absolute proof that they ever got sent or they were authored by the county, but they're on the website. This one says we've been maintaining that Alice Bay Dike the last 1,000 feet since 1932. We intend to keep doing it. This one also appears to be a letter. It's in letter format on the county website. You know, immediately south of the areas on the Alice Bay Dike where we're going to work. There's some areas that need work. We're going to dump 6 truckloads of rock on there, and that's going to be payment for the easements if there actually are easements. Okay. So we had all this information in hand by the end of March. We had found these documents. So this article shows up in the Skagit Valley Herald on Saturday, I think April 1st. And I just, you know, I'm bringing this out. So this is Danica Sessions, the spokesperson. You know, we have supported emergency repairs to the private dikes in the vicinity of Samish Island Road, but it's unclear to the county how much support had been provided in regard to the Alice Bay Dike. I mean, that's, you know, okay, supported that. I mean, you got these emergency resolutions and everything. Here's all this history and we provided it about doing it. They supported it. Okay, that's all right. So we sent a letter off to the county commissioners. Our letter got delivered on Monday, April 3rd, a couple of days after that article where they weren't really sure. They supported some emergency repairs. It wasn't clear if they'd ever done anything on the Alice Bay side. So
And that letter is on the website.
yeah, that letter is a lot of this stuff is on the website. So, you know, so we're thinking, man, this is great. We're gonna clear this up. We provided in this letters attachments, the easements, those letters, you know, all this stuff. It was all in this letter we sent, all this information about the county activity. So this is great. We're gonna clear this up. It's gonna be gonna put this to rest.
No more misunderstanding.
Yeah. And we had these 6 specific requests in there. Do this condition survey, like saying raise the dike where it's possible. We had heard that in some places it was too narrow to raise it to this elevation. Repair it where it's necessary, where it might get washed out by wave action. Armor that section that the land trust, you know, had recently repaired, but it's not armored. And recommit to the repair and maintenance of the dike. That's the most important one, I think. That one right there. And improve the notification system. Those were our asks. We got this very short letter back to all that. Basically the stuff, you know, they're looking at it, but there's nothing in there to make them think that anything we said had changed their view. Their view was that the Skagit Land Trust, and we had said in the letter, we felt that the county was primarily responsible for the dike repair because the dikes were so much a part of the critical road infrastructure. Well, they came back and said, well, we think that the Skagit Land Trust and Dike District 5 are primarily responsible for protecting road access or repairing the dikes. And they disagreed with some of the information we provided, but they couldn't say what on advice from attorneys. So we didn't know something. So something I've given you tonight, they might not agree with, but I don't know what it is. Everything I've said, I believe to be true, but there might be something in there. So keep that in mind. And some of us on the committee actually wondered, I wondered, other folks said that, because there's a reference in there. They can't provide it because of the potential for litigation on advice from attorney. We were wondering, did we just get threatened? Like, it has kind of a chilling effect on your endeavors. We decided, no, that wasn't a threat, but I don't think a reference like that has any place in a communication with a group of citizens that are trying to do what we're trying to do. Okay, we sent back, said, hey, we'd like to know what it was we said wrong, but how about the emergency protocols? You didn't say anything about that. The warning system, if we're not going to be able to have dike repair done, what are we going to do on these other things we asked about in our letter, improving the warning system or whatever? So we got a letter back, and they said, once again, this time they didn't say Dike District 5, but they said the land trust primarily responsible for protecting the road access. But it was good that in there they did show this openness to talk about the emergency protocols, work with us on the warning. So that was good. They made a reference to this flood watch issued prior to the King Tide event, and I looked for that, and I was not able to find that one issued prior to the King Tide event. One thing I guess I'll add, you might have noticed in our letter, we sent that letter to sent it to all three commissioners individually, and we also sent it to the prosecuting attorney's office. We had, all of us in various times or another, had heard so much about the influence of the prosecuting attorney's office in the decision-making process in Skagit County. And those range from, super commissioner veto power over the commission, or managing the county for zero liability. We can't repair, work on private dikes, on the advice of our attorneys, all this stuff. And the prosecuting attorney is the attorney for Skagit County by law. And if you go to the commissioner's website, it's really interesting. You go to the commissioner's website on the Skagit County website, the commissioner part, and it's got a thing in there that says the commission does not have authority over any other elected offices. And it lists them, including the prosecuting attorney, and not is in boldface, all caps, does not have authority. If you've got an issue with any of those guys, you've got to contact them yourself. So that's what we did. We sent a letter to him too. We didn't get any response back from him, at least not directly. We kind of think he might have been involved in some of those other responses. This is just another resolution that the county passed. This was in 2004. They actually authorized $50,000 for preliminary engineering on this Samish Island Road Dike Repair Project, ES whatever -1, which was item 20 in the annual repair program. What the results were of this survey, I couldn't tell you, but it was accompanied by rights of entry into all the parcels that the Squires family owned. So, just part of this, tons of information in there about the activity of the county on these. Okay, I don't really have time to. I don't have time to go through this. This is the most recent. The most recent posting, which was sometime around May 31st on the county website. I was going to go through this on a couple of points that I thought needed clarification. 6 cents of every dollar. I actually called and said, where does that come from? 6 cents on every dollar. For us, in a thing called county road fund, it's 16 cents of every dollar we pay goes into the county road fund. And I called the county, and they sent me to somebody in public works who had, where does 6 cents come from? And he said, call the assessor. I don't know. Call the assessor. They say, I don't know. I have no idea. It's $1.30 per thousand. which works out to about 16% of every dollar that we pay. And for us, here on Sandwich Island, plus a few homes out on the flats, $566,000 a year. Okay. And Mommy's gonna address this. I don't know what this is doing in here. They needed to do their homework before they bought the dike, you know. I put this up here because it has, we had this language that from Dike session, supporting emergency repairs. The bulk of the work, you know, it's unclear at this time how much, if any, support was directed to all this information that we provided. And they're still using this supported terminology and lack of clarity on if they ever did anything, if anything on the house statements. Yeah.
Who owns the Sandwich Island Road?
Skagit County,
Well, aren't they responsible for maintaining?
they're responsible for maintaining the road.
Yes. Give us that, give us access to them.
Yeah, you know, it's a question, it's kind of a legal question. This one, I really took exception to it, I am gonna, but when they, you know, in this document where they say it was closed for approximately 4 hours, you know, and then there was minor damage and they cleaned it up. You know, it's like, what a bunch of whiners. It's closed for 4 hours. And you're complaining, I mean, there's no mention whatsoever of the fact dike was damaged. We were potentially gonna have much more serious flooding for the next 2 weeks after if that dike didn't, no mention whatsoever. And we told them at the time, said, hey, we got a little window to repair this dike. And then the tides are gonna come back up again. We didn't really know how accurate we were on that. So Land Trust repaired the dike right in this picture, in this interval right here. Look at these tides. Went over 10 feet right there. 10, 12, I think it was straight days of 10+ foot tides on that damaged dike. That road would have been flooded, out. And this one, this is just incredible. Because I don't get to go into this, but read that. I mean, they got that part in there about the private dike not maintained and all that, but read that. This is what they said about the potential. And this is actually the flood watch that was supposedly issued prior. It was issued after the fact, but they laid it right out there in print what the danger was, that causing vehicles along the roadway to get washed away. They have the legal right in Washington State to go in there if there's an emergency situation. The county commissioners, if by unanimous vote, say there's an emergency, and they can go on to private dikes and repair them. And there's a definition I could show you of what constitutes an emergency. This is an emergency. Okay, go ahead.
Should we take a break?
Well, I could just rant. Yeah. Yeah, well, go ahead. If there's questions, well, I'll just get set up here.
If, in the event of, water coming over the, dike, there are 2 houses going down the road there, if they get water in their house, can they sue us?
Sue
Us, Sandwich Island.
I wouldn't think so. I don't know what basis they would have, but I really can't.
Water in your living.
I don't really know who could sue whom. But the last thing I was gonna add, you know, we kind of, as a, here's the mic, I'll go ahead and use it. As a committee, I think we kind of screwed up. We chased after this. We haven't worked on the dikes. We don't have a history of working on the dikes, and we expended so much energy giving them the information how they had worked on the dikes, you know, whatever, so we could clear that all up. The reality is, it makes absolutely no difference whether they had worked on the dikes had never worked on the dikes, makes no difference, makes no difference. If there's an emergency situation, the county commissioners, by unanimous vote of the commissioners present, say it's an emergency, they can expand county funds and repair that dike. It doesn't say in those RCWs, if you've worked on it before, if you have a clear record of having worked on, nothing like that. If it's an emergency, they can work on the dikes, period. They didn't do it. So I think, what does that mean? We can decide whether they fulfilled their responsibility for us.
So do people just want to stretch for just a minute?
Yes.
But I think one thing is, we got about.
Maybe we should all stop. Yeah. But then, as long as
Yeah, you've got no more guys. Should be another 4 weeks, that's an idea. Well, I don't know. No, I think it's. Yeah, yeah.
Did you get yeah, so let's do it. Let's get started. Can I have Kari and Hannah? I am. Thank you, that was great. Steve covered a lot of this, so I'm going to be able to go through pretty fast. And I'm just going to be talking about it from Skagit Land Trust perspective of coming into the properties that we purchased and what happened and what we're doing. And then I'm going to hand it over to our folks from Padilla Bay here, but we'll be pretty quick. And because I know it moves on to the Dike District and we're focused on access. But I wanted to, I'm only doing the executive director. I also happen to be a Samish Island resident.
I'm Hannah. I'm one of the stewardship coordinators at the Land Trust. So I help monitor and manage the properties the trust owns, including the Sandwich Island properties. So if you see something and need to say something, I'm the one that you say something to.
I am Kari and I'm a conservation project manager for Skagit Land Trust. I'm the one that worked with both Squires families to acquire the property and the one that's working with Padilla Bay Reserve to transfer it to them. And I just have to mention that with the first purchase of the Stephen Squires property, the county wrote us a very long letter of support for us to obtain grant funds for that property.
Yeah, so when we have our partner Padilla Bay, I'm going to explain it from the land trust perspective first, because we are still the owner of all the properties that you drive through that Steve just discussed. And 2 of those are hopefully going to Padilla Bay sometime this year. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So oops, I'm not sure this is going to work. There we go. Okay, so that's us standing on the David Squires property looking towards Samish Island, former David Squires property. Now can you, yes, you could get that so that it fits the screen. So besides the extensive farmland and the birding and all the things that are going on around us on the approach to Samish Island, oops, going back the wrong way. It's also an incredible area for marine habitat, marine shoreline. There's two DNR marine reserves. There's a state park. There's a Padilla Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. As we know, there's lots of WDFW lands. Skagit Land Trust and other partners own a lot of other conservation land in the area. And this map shows everything in color there is some sort of conservation. So you're sitting in an incredibly important area for conservation of marine areas as well as for agriculture and other things. It's an area of many uses, oysters, and that marine industry as well. It's also used to all be formerly marshland approaching the island. So everything in color in that right-hand map was at one time some sort of water, different forms of marshland approaching Samish Island before it was diked. It's an important cultural area for the Coast Salish, and we encourage using the indigenous place names, and the Samish Indian Nation have renamed the slough Suckalich, Samish Suckalich, which means coming out of a bay on Samish Island. And that is a picture of on Scott Road right now of where the slough came out, and that's a picture from their archives. These are the remains of Samish Suckalich on the former Steve Squires property, now owned by the Land Trust. And you can see the slough snaking through in that pink bubble, and then the slough is in the upper left-hand corner. So there are remnants of the old slough, but it's been pretty much blocked off. So I'm going to explain the purchases. This might be a little Sarah, I don't think there's
The red button.
Oh, the red button. Okay. So many of you helped us do these land protection purchases. 500 families and businesses helped us with various purchases. So these were conservation easements with the Squires family in 1995 and 2004. They're private, but the forest was protected almost 20 years ago, more than that. And in 2019, many of you helped us protect the Samish Flower Farm, which does have at a bit of the beach down here at the right along Padilla Bay. And then in 2021, we purchased the former Steve Squires property right here, the entrance. And then just in late 2022 and in the spring of 2023, we purchased these two properties from David Squires. And Kari here did almost all of those acquisitions. So if you have questions, you can ask her. She worked doggedly. So to do those purchases, just to give a background, as I said, 500 families and businesses, thank you so much. We could not do it without community support, because one thing that grantors want to see, even though we got a lot of grant funds for these projects, they have to see the communities involved. And so it was really important to have so many people involved. Many of you gave multiple times. We also got loans and grants from the Washington Estuarine Salmon Restoration Program, National Coastal Wetlands Program, North American Wetlands Conservation Act, private foundations, and the Conservation Fund currently we have 2 loans out with them on some of the properties. So in December 2022, the King Tide event and came maybe 4 days after we closed on the property, the David Squires. I also was in Hawaii. It seems to be where you need to be. So I'm going to go through what happened. In red are the areas that we repaired. And as Steve pointed out, the Dike, Norm talked to Steve, and then I met out with Norm, and I think Jim was actually maybe in Hawaii, I don't know. But Arnie and Steve, we met on the dike, and there was a big fear that that dike was going to breach. And it wasn't a dike that has any rock in it. It seemed to be all sort of mud and peat and clay, and you could actually see things seeping through and pushing through. And it looked like, yeah, another king tide. I can see that thing getting eaten totally through, in which case you'd have a lot of water flooding the road, flooding farm fields, flooding potential cars going on. So the emergency repairs that we did, the emergency repair we did, Steve has already shown. Just going to go back here. We did the emergency repairs here. The board, that last statement that Steve showed said that the dike could, when the county said we won't repair it, our board looked at it and said, it could breach, it could kill people, it could have cars washed away, it could damage the island, we'd lose access. And so they allotted a certain amount of money for us to repair it. We talked to Arnie and Jim, and we got a quote. Arnie Svensson Trucking and Jim Sullivan, and we started to repair as soon as we could, as soon as the shops opened on those days that Steve talked about. When we ran out of money, we did eco block repair. Arnie lent us eco blocks, and they came up with a really smart solution to give us 2 more feet of repair ability. I'll show you. And then finally, we sandbagged with 25 people on another section when we had totally used up all our funds. So there's Jim and Arnie and Hannah. And there's the dike repair, and you can see all that marsh that we've been talking about on the outside. That's so important. There they are with their trucks. They were great, really right after the long weekend, right on it. This is the eco block on the left section. So what Jim suggested was we put these eco blocks in, and then we put all this gravel here, and that would give us, I believe it's either 1.5 feet or 2 feet, but it brings it up so that it can withstand pretty good tides. And as you'll notice here, unlike the dike that was going to breach, this has a rock base, probably put in by the county when they repaired the road in the 60s or something like that. Then finally, we did the sandbagging. 25 volunteers. It was a great project, and we got it done, and it's still there. So these are pictures, and what I wanted to talk about, Steve mentioned it, was all of this dike that was going to breach where we did the major emergency repair. You could just see it. It was all just materials. It was all dirt and clay. This is where we eventually put in the eco blocks, and you can see it has a rock base. So quite different. Here, although it is eroding on the backside, here, when the floods come over, it's not going to eat through that rock nearly to the extent that something like this is, but this was deemed to be far too low. And as you get closer to the island, there is a dike that runs right directly along the road that I'm pretty sure the county put in when they did the drainage project, which you can find all the plans for on the county website, that puts our stormwater into the intersection at Scott Road. And if you walk at that intersection and you look, there's a culvert that comes under Samish Island Road, and it goes into a ditch, and that's where that rock dike starts. And I imagine that's when that dike went in, and it runs straight along Samish Island Road. And that was, I think, in the 60s. The really important marsh habitat that we've been talking about. And without it, that's where we're getting hit on those dikes and where things start to erode and are more at risk. So what was our belief that this county would step in for emergency access? We did think about it quite a bit. We actually met with the county a lot. So we understood that the dikes were not in a diking district. Yet we also believe that the emergency repair and dike repair for emergencies would be done by Public Works. And that was because we actually have letters from them, and we talked to them, and we sent a letter to them previous to the purchases. That's that same page that Steve was talking about. So this is a letter from the county in 2021, before we bought the first of the properties, the Steve Squires property on the Neck. And it says, we support your project. We assisted Dike District 12 to sandbag the dike during a high tide. And then this is Dan Berenson. I propose that we build a sand engine. He's talking about, well, let's think about what we can do here to make it better. And then he says, and we might be able to provide sand and gravel to build the sand engine, since it serves a road purpose for our taxpayers. So they were obviously at that point involved, and we thought, great, they're a partner. We're going to buy this property. We understand it's a dike on private land, but they're going to help us and figure out a way, because the roads are along there. So we wrote them back, and we said the dikes are privately owned, and as part of they're not part of any dike district. We don't have an obligation to maintain public infrastructure. We've discussed that the county is responsible for maintaining access on the road. We understand, however, there may be emergency situations, and we will open our properties to you and allow you to get on our land. We gave them access to our gates, keys, anything you need will help you out. And we really encourage you to develop a long-range plan for access on Samish Island. And we sent that to the county. They said, great, thanks, get your letter, no problem.
They also, as Kari said, wrote letters of support. Both Skagit County Public Works and Skagit County Marine Resources Committee wrote letters of support for our projects for both the Samish Flower Farm and the Steve Squires edition. So along with all these other great organizations, and I'm saying the county is a great organization. They're wonderful to work with when they're wanting to work with you on your project. And I believe that they will come along on these projects again. And just to reiterate a point Steve made, Section 36 Township, whatever was state trust lands. Washington State owned all of the Squires properties until 1956. There is no way the state is going to let a leasee decide whether or not the property gets dikes on them, doesn't get dikes on them. They had to have had discussions with the state. He was a leasee and he wasn't even sure he was going to continue the lease. There are many files, letters on file with DNR where it's like, well, he's going to take 2 more years, he's going to go this many more years. So the state was in control. They were the underlying landowner when the main road was built, when a lot of the infrastructure was built that we use today. Also, there are no documents, none, we've gone through everything, that assign the leasee, Mr. Squires, to be responsible for building or maintaining dikes to protect the new Simus Island Road that was built in 1932. There's nothing that says, Mr. Squires, we're going to put these dikes in and you're going to be responsible for protecting the road. And I'm pretty sure the Squires did not do much on the dikes. I mean, I'm just guessing, right? That wasn't something that they were thinking of. These are the maps that Steve showed. The one on the right is interesting because it shows in 1937, right around the time that the new road went in, it shows that little neck of where the old road went over the slough and where the new road was going in. That was the Squires lease at that point in time. And this map is actually DNR's land for leasees, and they were calculating how much land was arable and how much wasn't arable so that they could charge Mr. Squires a certain amount of money, and they would update it all the year. So it's really quite interesting. And as Norm would say, although these are called dikes, they were 4-foot high berms. They're not dikes that we're thinking of today. So the Squires family obviously didn't think they were going to be the ones keeping up the dikes, because that letter that Steve showed, it's a 1963 letter, said it is our intent, this is from the Mr. Squires, it's our intent to continue maintain this section of dike in the foreseeable future, and we've been doing it since 1932. So that was the Squires' impression, that wasn't their responsibility. And this is just showing you can kind of see the old road at the end, but the new road, and those are designs for the new road and the old road, and Steve's going through all that. So as Steve's research has shown, there's extensive county maintenance and repair and construction of dike on both Padilla and Samish Bay side. And this is on the county website. It's a 2003 project to establish the control points for the Squires Dike project. So yet another one. And one thing that we note is that the dikes that the Squires built, because certainly the Squires did build some dikes in the, especially Jim Squires Sr., were constructed in the old way of mud, peat, and clay. And there is still one of those along the Samish Flower Farm beach. There's no rock in that. If you walk along the Samish Flower Farm, that dike is totally dirt and mud. And actually, sometimes you can see the water push out the mud, and it's grass growing on top and blackberries right now. But right next to it on the right-hand side, you can see the difference of where the dike has been repaired, not by the Squires family. So I'm going to now hand this over to Padilla Bay, and we're going to talk about the property acquisition, because I think one of the questions is, well, what next? So what we've determined is, both of our organizations, is that as much as we want to be a player and a partner, and we certainly own the property, and we certainly do have those dikes on our property, we cannot be responsible for maintaining access for a public road, a county road. And not only that, but the county road has sunk and will continue to sink. And that's just bigger than we can solve. As a land trust, we don't even have access to infrastructure funds. I mean, you do not want us to own those dikes long-term and be responsible for you accessing Samish Island, because we won't have the funds to do anything about it. But all of us need to work together to figure out how to move forward in this situation, because as Dee pointed out, it is a very large issue and it's going to continue to be an issue, and it's a great opportunity as well. So, and I want to give a shout out to Dike District 5's here, because they've been terrific partners in helping us think through things when we had to do the emergency repairs, and really helped the land trust step in at a critical moment. So thank you, Norm.
Hey everyone, good evening. My name is Jude Apple. I'm the director at Padilla Bay National Research Reserve. What I'll do is I'll start out and give you a little background on the funding opportunity that allowed us to sort of engage in this project and acquisition with the Skagit Land Trust. And then I'll pass it on to Roger to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the restoration and conservation opportunity that we have. And then maybe loop Carly back in as we talk about how the process of the acquisition is going. It's great to see all of you. Good evening. Thanks for sharing your time. So last summer, maybe a little bit longer than that, there's a large sum of money that has been made available to the National Estuarine Research Reserve System and the Coastal Zone Management Programs through the IIJA. That's the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which is now the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a lot of federal money, long story short, federal money that's coming to the states and reserve systems to enable us to do restoration and conservation work in coastal ecosystems. So we submitted a proposal partnering with the Skagit Land Trust to NOAA for this acquisition opportunity and restoration opportunity. And it was a really strong proposal in our eyes and of interest to us at the reserve, because it included a couple of different components. One, it will give us an opportunity to expand the land that we conserve and protect as part of the reserve system. So that acquisition alone allows us to increase the reserve boundaries and increase the area that's protected within the Padilla Bay watershed. There's also an opportunity to involve multiple community members and parties that are interested in what is done with this property. So the Samish Island residents, the Dike district, the agricultural community. There are a lot of cultural resources that have been brought up here in terms of the Samish community. So it really had high value for multiple benefits beyond just the restoration potential and the expansion of habitat, which is probably the primary interest for us to enter into it. But it was really a high value proposal that we saw, and we submitted this proposal. We were invited to draft a full proposal and received the funding earlier this spring to move forward on this acquisition and restoration planning and feasibility study. And so that gets us to this point where we have a large sum of money from the federal government to move forward on this acquisition and the project that we have outlined. And maybe I'll pass it over to Roger to talk a little bit more about the specifics of that.
Hi, you bet. I'm Roger Fuller. I'm the Natural Resource Coordinator for the Padilla Reserve. And so this projects like this often come under my area of wherever. And I think that we're really interested in this project because the Land Trust had purchased the initial Seed Inspires parcel and had begun a restoration assessment to look at the potential of restoring salt marsh. And salt marshes and tidal marsh is a habitat that used to be really abundant along Padilla Bay, and is there's not much left of it because of conversion to ag lands and other things. And I love my local potatoes, so I don't want to see all the ag lands gone. But since this was an opportunity to look at a potential restoration project, we were pretty excited about being able to do something like that. And so the idea with doing a potential restoration project here is that from the ecological standpoint, which is the perspective that I approach the project from, is to be able to restore salt marsh in this area and to restore a lot of the ecological values that it provides to a whole bunch of different kinds of species in that particular area. And it also provides other kinds of services to humans as well. So one of the things that it does, the salt marsh provides when you have a marsh associated with coastal infrastructure like a dike system, is that when you have that in front of a dike system, it can help to reduce the wave energy of storm waves that pass across the marsh. The marsh is a little bit, it's more elevated than the mudflat area. It has a lot of vegetation on it. Even during the winter, when the vegetation dies back, there's still a lot of biomass on there. And as the waves move across that kind of a landscape, it helps to slow the water down a little bit and to reduce the height of the waves. And so when you have a dike system with marsh in front of it, that marsh helps to protect the dike system from real damage in big storms. So our thoughts with this opportunity project is that we can design, hopefully, a project that is able to restore habitat, and that can be designed in a way that also directly incorporates the physical infrastructure of dikes and roads and other things, and in a way that makes all of it, the habitat as well as the infrastructure, much more resilient than it currently is to storms and to things like sea level rise and so on. So so that's kind of our perspective at the beginning of this project, is that we hope to do a restoration project that will generate ecological benefits for some of the resources that we care about as the reserve, and that at the same time incorporate some of these really important benefits for protecting infrastructure that the community really depends on. And we're just at the very beginning stage of going through that process. So it's a process that will, by necessity, involve a lot of stakeholders in that whole process of designing everything. And so it's just beginning. And I think I'll just leave it at that. And I'm happy to answer any questions that come up with that. But
Would the emphasis be primarily on Padilla Bay or on both Padilla and Allen?
Great question. My preference as an ecologist is that I would love to see the bays connected again for a number of reasons, ecologically, and in restoring a salt marshes and tidal wetlands are natural places where the sediment that's carried by rivers and by in the bay ends up, it gets deposited, and it really helps the salt marsh. It's a good thing. And Samish River used to be connected with Padilla, and so in addition to losing the Skagit, we lost the Samish in terms of sediment delivery and freshwater delivery into the bay. So I personally would love to see that, but it's a complicated question because there's a lot of other issues involved with that, including the infrastructure questions. There's questions about that some of the folks involved in Chinook recovery have raised that the Samish Chinook is a hatchery Chinook and the genetics aren't from this area. And they would not, they're concerned that the young Samish Chinook coming out of the river could mix with the Skagit wild Chinook in Padilla Bay, and that there might be competition between them at that point. We know that both runs intermix in Padilla Bay already. There's just good questions raised about whether that would significantly increase or not the amount of competition that happened between the young folks from one bay, from the one river and the other. So they've said, we're not against it. We just would like to see a little bit of study done to see whether or not it would have a significant impact or not. So there's those issues. There's just general issues about things like invasives from one side or the other, invasive species like European green crabs or other kinds of things, bamboo worms, from moving from one side to the other more quickly. There's questions just about what would happen to the circulation of water in Samish Bay if there's a linkage there, and would that affect things like aquaculture? So there's really important questions out there that I think need to be sorted out before we get to that point.
King tides are expected in the December-January timeframe. Do you expect to have done anything to raise the level of the dike between now and then?
So can I speak to that? So our game plan, we've been having conversations with the Skagit Land Trust, with the county. We had, following the breach and flooding events, we came together and started meeting regularly. I think what I will say is that we are, I think we're all happy that everyone's at the same table, and the Dike District, of course, that we are working towards a collaborative and equitable and legally responsible role that each of us plays in maintenance of the dike. So I can neither commit to us doing any repairs at this point, since we don't even own the property yet. But I think there's a lot of work to be done to figure out pathways to be able to have the county engaged in improving the dike so that they could possibly be under dike district maintenance, but there's a lot of barriers to that as well. So it's a road that we have to walk.
Well, it's a pretty firm deadline.
Yep. And it all costs time and money, which we all have to figure out how to come up with. Yeah.
I guess it's not clear to me what your interest in maintaining the dikes at all would be. Seems if you're gonna spend money on dikes, it would be to remove them and return land to saltwater marsh rather than figure a road to the bottom. Is there a reason other than neighborhood?
Well, no, I think it's stronger than neighborliness is that the reserve has a commitment to the community, and we are stewards of our communities and the ecosystems here. And in particular, when we talk about resilience, and which is the sort of umbrella that this funding opportunity comes through, it is not just resilient ecosystems, but how do we help our coastal communities be resilient to sea level rise and climate change? And part of that resilience for Samish Island is being able to access your homes at any time you need to. And so, yeah, it is a multifaceted challenge that we're facing that is more than just restoring the marshes, but how do we help this whole community be more resilient? Yeah, question in the back. That's a great question. And we've been talking about what our access policy will be. At this point in time, we have to consider all of the stakeholder interests, which are very diverse, from birding and hunting and walking and hiking. So we will be working with everyone in the Skagit Land Trust to develop a policy on that. I will say that access to the land is certainly something that we, some access to the land is something that we envision, because it's a great interpretive and learning opportunity and a way for all of us to experience living systems, which is important for our hearts and souls and minds. But those details of that need to be worked out. Yeah. Yes, please.
I think my question would be more to Steve and Norm. What is the short-term idea of what the heck we're gonna do between now and when the tides start coming back in again? Because we can talk about all these wonderful things out there and I'm for what you're doing, but that's not answered the question of how the heck we're gonna get off this island if the tides go over the banks again. And so one of those guys, I think.
I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that.
Well, I mean, but we must have kind of a thought after all these meetings these guys have been having, of kind of what you might think is a possibility of what we could do, at least short term, for that little stretch through there, if we can't get the county to finish the dike in that place. Anybody?
I can offer a suggestion that came up in our meetings, but one that now has a challenge to it. So the county, as we've heard, is not in the business of repairing dikes, but there is a scenario where we could have support from the county to bring the dikes. This is suggestion, I'm not committing, nobody's committing this, but bring the dikes up to an acceptable standard that they could then be maintained by the dike district. That is one scenario that we discussed. I think, which seemed amenable to many parties involved. I think a challenge that we're seeing with that is dike improvements, there are some restrictions and mitigation requirements on dike improvements right now that make that work very expensive. And so I think there's a new hurdle in that initial recommendation. I'd love to, if, yeah,
So I wouldn't panic yet. I think what we've looked at is the longer term, and Steve did point out that there's more risk right now. If the dikes over top where there's rock underneath, it just means the road might be closed for a while, there'll be water over, and there are some sections, we've been mapping them, and the county actually did a drone flight over them and mapped them, that are more at risk. The county, we could all sandbag some of those sections. The eco block section probably will hold up. And I'll let Norm or Jim talk about it. I think the repair section that we did will hold up. It's just that it will start to lose parts of its structure over time. It'll start to lose the fines, I think they call them, because it doesn't have the riprap on the outside. So we're in a much better place than we were at this time last year, where we had 3 sections that were, it turned out, in really bad shape. Those 3 sections all have, one's a Band-Aid, I will admit it, the sandbags, and the 2 other are fairly good. So what I'd like to do is walk it with the Dike District and other people that are knowledgeable, and really before the bad season, pick out, are there sections that are weak that we do need to figure out something about. This whole section, Padilla Bay is purchasing those bottom 2 from us, which is where the potential breach was going to happen. But the next sections up, those also have, they have rock underneath them, but there are some sections that are pretty low.
These discussions about strikes, does it never come up about the bridge? Because some communities like this have done this. I know it's in that 30-40 million. But does it ever get discussed as longer range?
Yes, in the longer range. We've been having discussions about a potential restoration project and about some very generalized ideas of what the restoration and the infrastructure could look like in the future. And a bridge is one of those options that could be possible. And as you mentioned, that involves a much higher price tag than any other part of the project. So that's definitely been discussed as one of the longer term options that we can look at. And we actually just had a meeting today with another group that is going to help us put together hopefully a proposal to help to look at some of those alternatives that would include something like that.
And then that was about, if you had that bridge and some of the other partners were all right with they joining, you could have a salt marsh back if you have a bridge.
Yeah, that's right. That would allow the salt marsh and the reconnection.
I'd like to just comment a little bit on what we can do. I think as a community, one of the most important things that we can do, looking ahead in the near term before some of these grand plans are put in place, is just prepare. These are low probability events of all this stuff coming together and having some catastrophic failure. But we just need to prepare. We need to get that advanced warning system, whether we're going to establish that ourselves or try to give people a heads up, more of a heads up of these events coming, and then adjust accordingly. Make sure you've got your medicines or whatever, and that you can get by for a few hours or even a few days without access. I think that's really important to do right now. The county's saying that right now what their intention is to make sure they get the road closed in a timely manner, and they'll repair the road surface quickly after an event if it gets damaged, like it got damaged a little bit on December 27th. But for us as a community, just prepare for these things so we minimize the impact.
So what does preparation mean? It used to be, 3 days worth of food, water,
Now it's 2 weeks, okay? And yeah, who has 2 weeks? Anybody have 2 weeks? Okay, maybe, I don't know. The fire department doesn't have 2 weeks. We have hours worth. Why? Because we just don't use it enough. But, yeah. Don't expect the fire department to have,
About 2 weeks of propane.
yeah. Yeah, especially if you've got a generator. House generator. That isn't gonna last, okay? So, yeah. Yeah. I'm not trying to be negative. I look at emergency worst case stuff and, yeah. Have some canned supplies, yeah, really. Perfect. Okay, yeah, any other question?
Mike, what do you have planned if the road is blocked for medical access? Is there helicopter or?
There is a helicopter, okay, it's a fairly expensive. Even though you're probably only paid 20% of it as an emergent air ambulance, but still, that can be fairly expensive. There are ways to get sign on to a membership that cuts your costs down. So there are air ambulances in this county, in the state that you can sign on to. You tell us if that's important, and we call them to come and pick you up. We have landing zones on the island, multiple landing zones, and then we'll transport that way. I hope that doesn't come. There are other ways to do it. There's boats, there's potentially Bellingham Fire Department boat that comes, but yeah, it is a challenge. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about, I understand the access to the island, but I haven't heard anything about people who have beachfront property. We live at the end of the Blue Heron Lane.
Sure.
And several hundred yards to the west of us, a dike was built out, not a dike, but a barrier. And that changed the entire complexion of our beachfront, which makes us very flood accessible now.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, the ecologists and everyone, what can we do?
I'm not. Geologist, maybe in the room, I don't think.
I'm aware of that. I was, probably the best thing with the nourishment program.
If what?
A beach nourishment program,
Okay.
which was done, I think in 1997, in front of 5 or 6 properties. It's held up actually longer than it was originally designed for. It lasted at least, I think, 12 years longer than it was supposed to. I looked at it last winter after the event, and it's still doing its job. It doesn't stop the flooding. It does stop the beach erosion.
Oh, what exactly is beach nourishment? We don't have it.
Yeah, it's basically barges were brought in and gravel was placed on the beach.
No, ecology won't let you do that.
They'll still let you do it. It is a big process though. And in fact, it's now for anyone doing a bulkhead repair, you're required to do some nourishment to mitigate for your repair.
Where do we get those kind of instructions for nourishment? Who do we ask for advice?
With Jim Johansson with Coastal Services in Bellingham, Coastal Geological Services did the original project. And that was based on a recommendation that I made that it needed to be done. So.
Are you easily available to the folks that need a little help?
Yeah, you feel free to call. Yeah. I'll leave you a copy.
We invited Norm Hoffman from Dike District 5 to come and address this tonight also, and before we advance any further on the questions, if that's okay.
I'd like to segue right into that.
Okay.
If we can. I've never been able to wrap my head around the idea of having a good section of dike right next to a very poor section of dike. Isn't the dike only as good as the weakest part? That's the one.
Really good question.
I'm Norm Hoffman. I'm with Dike District 5 as one of the volunteer commissioners, and Jim Sullivan's in the back here. Raise your hand again, Jim, please. And he's been a commissioner for more than 30 years in the district, so has a great amount of experience. Molly thanked me for helping with the projects the Land Trust has been engaged in, and actually I did the telephone calls and some of the writing and communicating, but Jim's the one who actually did the work, and he should be recognized for that. So we appreciate it. The Dike District was approached in the late 1990s and was asked if it would be responsible for taking over the private dikes on the approaches to Samish Island on both the Padilla Bay side. Excuse me for saying Padilla, but I grew up here. And on the Alice Bay side. And the district agreed to take over both sides of the road and protect the infrastructure that the county owned if the dikes were brought up to standard before we took ownership. And the county was not able to pull enough money together to make that commitment. At the time, the estimate, I think, was around $600,000. And if you look at how much things have been plated since then, you know that it would be almost prohibitive for them to make an initial investment of that sort. They would have to do it over time. Molly's description of communication with the county and their support over the past few years was right on spot. When Dan Berenson was the director of the public services for the county, he was very helpful and willing to provide as much support as we needed to keep the Samish Island Road intact and passable. And there has just been a change of the guard at the county, and I'm trying to be patient with them because they have dropped some of our prioritized projects for District 5 in favor of some other priorities that they've developed over the past year with the new director of public services and with a new surface water manager. So things are changing. The good news is Michael C., who's the assistant manager to county now for public works, has been putting pressure on us to get an estimate done for bringing the dikes up to standard, especially on the Alice Bay side, to Samish Island from the end of our district dike. So they haven't made any commitment, they haven't said anything out loud, but I think that they're looking at the potential of at least building that one up to standard and having our district take it over, which we'd be willing to do if it were possible. On the Padilla Bay side, of course, that depends on what Roger and Jude decide to do with their project. If they let the Padilla Bay dike on the approach pretty much go back to its natural state, District 5 will have to at least look at the potential of putting that William Dale dike back in. And the William Dale dike that Steve alluded to and showed in his illustrations was the southern boundary of the Squires property and the northern boundary of Dike District 5. It was an east-west dike. And when Clifford Squires died a few years ago, his estate asked that Dike District 5 give up the right-of-way to the William Dale dike. Thinking that we would never need to put an east-west dike in, we gave it up. So if we had to put another dike in, I don't think it would be a terrible problem for us to create another one on either side of the William Dale property. And we do have the power of eminent domain if we need to exercise that, but hopefully that wouldn't be necessary. That would be our worst case scenario. Best case scenario is we work with Padilla Bay Estuary and Land Trust and other entities engaged in the process of protecting Samish Islands transportation and access, which we think is really important. Dike District 5's charge or responsibility is to protect the land within its district. But as you can expect, that responsibility has expanded over the years. And now we protect people and property as well. And we also try to be good neighbors. And that's one nice thing that I see about working with all the different entities that are interested in the approach to Samish Island. I think we want to help each other as we go through this process. Go ahead, I see a hand in the back.
Yeah, I'm confused about who pays into the Dike. And if it's just the landowner, because that's what I think is it was all. But there's a special tax where we all chip in. You get proactive.
Yeah. Our landowners, parcel owners pay approximately $15 per year per acre. And that is just within the boundaries of the Dike district. We have approximately 3,000 acres in our district. Skagit County, as you might have read in the paper, has been making a proposal for a regional taxation district in another part of the county where they pay for infrastructure which is dedicated to their use. And I'm surprised that they haven't approached Samish Island residents with a similar proposal yet. And maybe that's what they're doing by refusing to assist in the repair of the dikes along the road. They're perhaps setting the table that way. I don't know. Another question?
Yeah, just wanted to say thanks on behalf of everybody who's working on this. I know it's not your problem, it's been 100 years in the making, but Dike District 5 and Skagit Land Trust and Padilla Bay. Thanks for being good stewards and trying to solve this for us.
Well, as I mentioned, our responsibility as district commissioners is to protect the land. And a real threat to our land is the failing dike along the Samish Island Road. Because once that salt water comes over, and we have millions and millions of gallons come over on December 27th, that gets into our drainage systems, and it forces salt water uphill, basically. And that does affect our land. So we have a real stake in this as well. Steve, did you have a question?
I did.
Okay.
You have provided us with some information about the new requirements for mitigation for dike repairs that you may be faced with, and incredible expenditures to do if you're actually forced to do that, to do repairs that you envision. Will those requirements that we heard about potentially apply to work on the out-of-state dike? Is that potentially going to make that work way more expensive than it was in the recent past?
Well, I brought with me the executive director of the Skagit Drainage Districts Consortium. We have 12 dike and drainage districts in the county that have gathered together to take on challenges cooperatively. And one of those challenges is permitting for all the work that we do along the shorelines. Jenna Freebull came to us from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, where she worked in environmental issues, and she also has a background in hydrology and construction management. And we recruited her to be our executive director 5 years ago. And she is probably the one most in tune with current regulations and mitigation. And she's worked directly with NOAA Fisheries and National Marine Fisheries on some of these issues. So I'm going to let her address the challenges that we have now that are new from just last year. Jen?
Thanks, but you should stay here. Yeah, so
Dike District 5 had storm damage, coastal flooding damage, in 2021, and FEMA declared it a federal emergency, which allows the Dike District to work with FEMA to do emergency repairs. And then also there's a program that allows the Dike District to work directly with FEMA for long-term repairs to address what they call coastal mitigation, but that's a different type of mitigation. That's the mitigation that prevents damage in the future. And so as part of the work, Dike District 5 did a lot of repair above the high tide line with existing permits the summer after the damage, and then hired an engineering firm to do design for the long-term repairs, which included rock below the high tide line. And that was replacing rock that was damaged and washed away during the storm. And so almost a year ago now, we applied for a Corps of Engineers permit. You have to get a federal permit to put rock below the high tide line. And even though it was a repair project, and even though FEMA had already done the analysis to say just replacing what was lost, another hurdle is that because of listed Puget Sound Chinook salmon, you have to get it, you have to demonstrate that you're complying with the Endangered Species Act. And in June, the rules changed quite dramatically, and NOAA Fisheries has adopted what's called the Sailor Sea Nearshore Programmatic Buyout. And to get any sort of permit, you have to demonstrate compliance using this mitigation calculator. Prior to that, the baseline condition for maintenance and repair was what was out there at the time of the damage, at the time of the project application. That baseline definition has been changed, and based on our understanding of that definition, the baseline condition is now 1850, so pre-European settlement. And if you use the calculator, which we did, it spits out what's called the conservation burden. And then there's ways that you can meet that conservation burden. Many of them aren't applicable. So beach nourishment, but we're not in the right area, remove creosote piles, the list goes on. We had multiple meetings with NIMS trying to understand. So for the project, FEMA was estimating $350,000 of rock. A portion of that is below the high tide line. $8 million of mitigation was the final answer from NIMS. And even with the cost share, which is 90-10, the Dike District can't pay for the mitigation. The other hurdle, there were several hurdles. The other one was that the only bank for conservation credits was the Puget Sound Partnership. And FEMA was sort of unwilling and unable to just blindly write a check to the partnership because there wasn't the certainty that that money would get on the ground in a way that was transparent, and the accounting system wasn't fully operational. The other problem was that there's only a certain number of credits allocated to Puget Sound, and Norm's project would have used half of those. And so the Corps was saying you can't get the credits this way, you have to get through individual permitting, which is going to take years. And yes, Alice Bay, anything on the Alice Bay below high tide line is going to have to run through those same hurdles, and it makes it slow, it makes it unpredictable, and seems to be very cost prohibitive unless you can come up with a more integrated plan, which is really why we're excited about working with Ecology and the Land Trust. So stay tuned for more. Other districts have been looking to get permits, and it's been 4 years and we haven't been able to get permits.
So for the Padilla Bay project, $350,000 project that FEMA was willing to pay 90% of, and then we have an $8 million mitigation charge on top of that, and the district can't pay that 10%. So we're not in it. And we thought FEMA would just flat out tell us we can't pay that kind of mitigation. But the regional director from FEMA came and met with Janet and me and did a site visit on both Padilla Bay Dike and Alice Bay Dike. And he said, you know, we have to pay the mitigation fee. FEMA has to pay 90% because they're required by law to restore an eligible project back to pre-disaster condition, period, regardless of the cost. But they don't want to pay the $8 million because they think it's extortion. And they don't agree with it. And so they've hired an environmental consultant for us to work with us to see what we can do instead of paying the $8 million, and it would be an extra $5 million in mitigation on the Alice Bay Dike if we were to do that project. And they've also referred us to an engineer who may be able to design a repair that does not include work below the high tide line on the seaward side of the dike. So we're looking at that opportunity as well. It's tough for us.
Nor just to clarify, these are all dikes currently in the dike district, not the Alice Bay dike.
That's correct, just our dikes.
On that dike, because the riprap could go above the high tide line, it's a different permitting process.
Correct. We had 8,500 tons of rock spec'd by FEMA for our Padilla Bay Dike this summer. And when we found out what was going to happen if we put armoring below the high tide line, we thought about it. We decided we better take all the material we can get now before the rules change again and just work above the high tide line. And as you and Steve showed in your pictures, most of the erosion has happened at the top of the dike that was not protected by the rock. So on the Padilla Bay Dike, and you've probably seen the trucks out there running and putting rock on, it's all going above the high tide line. And this year we had donated material given to us for the Alice Bay Dike. And that material was not armoring, no rock at all. And we raised the dike with soft material, and that went above the high tide line too, because we had 14 different sections, I believe, that were overtopped during the December 27th flood on our two dikes. So, but we were able to get at it this year, and the no man's land that the Alice Bay Dike is in on the approach to Sandwich Island is probably going to be a 3-year process at the very least before anything can be done with all the permitting requirements. Even if somebody wrote a check today for $10 million, it would take you 3 years at least to get it done. Steve?
What you've referred several times to the high tide level or high tide line. What exactly is that? Is that mean high water, mean higher high water? What is the high tide line?
Yeah, the HTL, you can find it on the NOAA tidal station. And for Padilla Bay, that is Friday Harbor, San Juan Island. And for Sandwich Bay, Alice Bay, we use Bellingham.
Okay.
And NOAA had a project in Bellingham 2 years ago, and they used the Bellingham station for their HTL high tide line.
What's the reading of it? How high is that? Is that?
9.78 feet.
That's a Bellingham Bay tide, 9.78 feet. That's the high tide line.
Right.
And Bellingham is essentially the same as us in terms of correction. So it's based on Port Townsend. So that's pretty high.
Yeah.
What's the top of the marsh, Steve? What's on the outside?
9.2.
Okay, so above the 6 inches above the mark.
Yeah.
I have a question. If you brought salt water back into all these subsided marshland areas, would they float again? Would it pop up? Or is once it's gone, it's gone?
Great question. I'm not that kind of an expert. But one of the things that does contribute to subsidence, the geologist talked about the organic matter decomposing. That's a really big part of it. Another part, when you dike and drain the land, the water that saturates that soil occupies quite a bit of space. And so when you drain it, that also causes the soil to subside as well. So I would think that if you restore that, that would raise some of that. But regarding the subsidence thing, that's one of the questions that it will be looked at as part of the restoration feasibility assessment, is what the elevations are in that area and what the potential for marsh is. and whether or not there will need to be alterations done with in terms of where the sediment is and what the options would be to do that. So we'll be looking at that.
So are you guys giving any credence to our, what I would call three little pig subsidence theory?
3 little pigs.
Yeah.
Subsidence.
Our homegrown subsidence analysis.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, what you said about subsidence is that's what happens, and that happens all over the place where we do this in these kind of systems. So that's, yeah, and the ways that you described it, that's right, right in there.
What do most areas that have a road that is subsiding do without their road? Do they raise the road or do they raise the road?
I think it's totally depends on the situation and the stakeholders involved there and the people involved in the decisions that they make. And
Talk about raising the road.
yeah,
They are talking about it.
Yeah.
That May 31st, that figures very prominently in there, the possibility of having to raise the road. They've come around to it. But it needs to be part of this big picture, that the big picture discussion. Is that really the solution that all the stakeholders, when they get together, decide is the right one? That's the key, one of the keys.
right. Yeah, there's many options. One of them is raising the roads.
Or in causeway.
Yeah.
I was curious, do you have a policy with the FAA regarding future sea level, relative sea level rise for this area that you plan for? A number of it.
Policy, that would be the director's responsibility.
We have policies on sea level rise. There's ideas and hypotheses and, but are we doing what are we using in projections?
Yeah, is there kind of a number that you utilize? And I ask this because I actually have for a company. And a method that we use for a project we work on, but that's just ours. So just curious when you would project.
We would need a specific. We would need some specific project with some hydrology modeling component where we would put things specifically about sea level rise and then so, but we don't have a number like written on a post. Well, put that on my wall.
Well, there are projections for sea level rise that are local, and the Washington Sea Grant, together with, I can't remember who all the partners were in on that, USGS and possibly the Department of Ecology, I'm not sure. Kind of did a update of the sea level rise projections, and they incorporated things like subsidence and glacial rebound and things like that, what we know about those things in those projections. And they have a cool tool online that you can go on and look in very specific places, and it'll give you some projections for different scenarios, and their projections for this area for I can't remember, it's 2080 or 2100, I think. For kind of a middle of the road situation was about 2 feet of sea level rise. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but we rely on theirs because they're the most definitive.
That's right.
Thing out there. Yeah.
But they use your
Yeah.
But it seems like the bigger issue now is the barometric pressure, like the Earth. As concerning an issue is it's just being pushed up even though you know it.
Yeah, I mean, there's many different factors that affect the sea level on any given day or any moment in the day. One of them is barometric pressure, which is a big part of what caused the December 27 thing. We had a really low pressure event that allowed the water level to come up a couple of feet. And so those are things that are hard to plan for. It was an event that was very low probability, but it happened and it coincided with the king tide, and so those are the kinds of events where we see these kinds of problems. But yeah.
Okay. Did we take care of the questions? 8:25, that's not bad. I apologize for going over so far, but I had a lot of material I was trying to get through and made it through most of it. Anyway, I don't even know the answer to that. I mean, the slides, if you want to see the remainder of the slides or review the slides, that they're available.
There's a link.
There's a link on
There's a link.
Google, Instagram,
Google Drive.
Google Drive.
But I'm gonna upload this recording to YouTube. There's a Samish Island YouTube channel. And I'll put the links to both slide decks in the YouTube. And I will send that YouTube link once I get it out to Samish neighbors, so everybody has access.
And the slides you can get now, if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, but anyway, this is kind of delayed, well, we have tomorrow.
Oh,
Okay.
tomorrow, okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.